Welcome to Earthkeeper Stargate video presentation of Kevin Todeschi. Kevin speaks in this fascinating video lecture on the Akashic Records, as described in the readings of the extraordinary seer and prophet, Edgar Cayce. Kevin Todeschi is the CEO of the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment. He is a prolific speaker, teacher and author, having written over 60 books. Kevin Todeschi will be a featured keynote speaker at the Earthkeeper 2019 Atlantis event, November the 22nd through 25th, in the beautiful, verdant hills of the Crystal Vortex of Arkansas. Arkansas is the largest strata of quartz crystal on the planet, and is a mega stargate portal. Arkansas is the new seed donor, an utterly astonishing vortexal energy. For details of the Earthkeeper Epic Atlantis 4-day conference, which features a stellar lineup of internationally renowned speakers, go to our website at www.earth-keeper.com. Thank you.
I've come to deeply, deeply admire. I spend a lot of time listening to interviews and lectures, and Kevin Todeschi is one of my favorites. He is a man of integrity, he is a man of purpose, he is a man of mission, and he provides a great service, as do all of the people who work in the ARE. The ARE is, in my opinion, the most credible spiritual organization on the planet. And it is the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the Edgar Cayce ARE, that provide that beautiful message and that beautiful group that you want to be associated with. And so I would like to ask for a round of applause for Kevin Todeschi. Thank you.
Thank you all. It is a privilege again to be with you, and thank you so much, James, for putting this conference on. It's just been great. We're going to talk this morning about one of my favorite topics, which is Edgar Cayce on the Akashic Records. For those who don't know what they are, you will know by the end of this talk. And we're going to see how the Akashic Records influence us in 3 different ways. The records of the past really influence us in terms of memory. The records of the present influence us in terms of drawing us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. And the records of the future influence us in terms of they're constantly calculating our probable futures based on our choices and decisions in the present. So to start, let me start with a question someone once asked Edgar Cayce. What source does this body, Edgar Cayce, derive its information? In other words, when he's asleep, where is he getting his information? And the answer is a little convoluted, so I've separated it into 3 different pieces. Okay, so the first piece of the answer. The information is given or obtained from this body is gathered from the sources from which the suggestion may derive its information. What he's saying is the thoughts, the motivation, the ideals, the level of need of the person asking for the reading has a great deal to do with the quality of the information. So that, for example, a woman who had a 6th child will get a much higher caliber of information than someone wanting to know who's going to win the next horse race. So the suggestioner is going to have a great deal of impact on the answer. The second one, in this state, the conscious mind becomes subjugated to the subconscious, superconscious, or soul mind, and may and does communicate with like minds, and the subconscious or soul forces become universal. Somehow Edgar Cayce's mind was able to put himself in touch with the higher self of all of us, the superconsciousness, which we'll look at in just a moment, and get information from that level, from the universal mind of God. And finally, from any subconscious mind, information may be obtained either from this plane or from the impressions as left by the individuals that have gone on or before. The topic of vibrations is a whole nother topic, but basically he's saying that thought leaves a vibration. And whether we're here in the earth or we've gone on to the next plane, that the vibrations we've left behind are somehow recorded. And someone like an Edgar Cayce can pick up on that information and give data. And on another occasion, he said, upon time and space is written the thoughts, the deeds, the activities of an entity, hence has often been called, the record is God's book of remembrance. So, just looking at this in a picture form, our subconscious mind knows everything about us. It knows our blood pressure, our temperature, our acid-alkaline balance. So Cayce is saying that somehow his subconscious mind can communicate with the subconscious mind of this guy who doesn't feel well, and his subconscious mind knows he has the flu. So asleep there on the couch, Edgar Cayce could tune into the person's subconscious mind and say what was wrong with the individual. In terms of the Akashic Records, they exist as kind of an etheric film around the earth, an etheric force field. And every thought, every deed, every activity that's ever written there is written next to the soul name of the soul that committed that act. And in this case, this individual was once a monk, and Edgar Cayce can see, this person was once a monk. Now, as unusual as that may sound, the fact that there might be an invisible force field around the earth with a bunch of data, anyone who has ever read about a near-death experience, and a person having a near-death experience basically has a life review, what they're essentially doing is they're tuning into their own Akashic record, seeing a life review of what happened to them, what transpired, and that's where they're getting their information. The word Akashic comes from the Sanskrit word, and it basically means boundless space. And the Akashic records are mentioned several times in the Bible, including here, and I saw the dead small and great stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. Now, Edgar Cayce adds something kind of unique about the Akashic records. He suggests that the records are also concerned with intent. Why we do what we do. Sometimes we have all the right motivations, but things don't work out right. Cayce said we get credit for the try. Isn't that good to know? We get credit for the try. On other occasions, we have very selfish motives. That's what we get credit for. And one of my favorite examples of this is there was a woman who came to Edgar Cayce at the age of 29 for a health problem, which Mr. Cayce helped her with. And later on, she got a life reading, which has to do with the past, our past lives. And unbeknownst to Mr. Cayce, all her life growing up, she had had a very soiled reputation. She was known as the good time girl. Boys joke that if you wanted to have a really good date on a Friday night, this is who you wanted to go out with. It's not someone you want to bring home to your mom, but this is someone you want to go out with. And other girls didn't want to be this woman's friend because she had such a poor reputation. And according to this woman, none of this was true, but all her life she felt like she was kind of like a soiled woman. She had a bad reputation and didn't know why. Edgar Cayce gave her a reading and told her in her most recent past life, in the Old West, she had been a prostitute. And she had used the only thing she had, her body, to get what she wanted. So she'd used her body to get what she wanted, and her intent was selfishness. And if you're like me, trying to figure out how the system works, even though she's not involved in the same line of work, because there's an Akashic field residue that we all pick up on all the time, we just don't know that that's what we're doing, that's where her reputation came from. Later on, about 3 years later, another woman came to Mr. Cayce. She exuded love. Her nickname was the Angel. People said by being in her presence, they could feel the presence of love. And Edgar Cayce gave her a past life reading and told her that in her most recent past life, she had been a prostitute. But she had used the only thing she had out of love to give companionship to lonely men. So the first one got credit for selfishness, and it was reinforced in the present. And the second one got credit for love, and it was reinforced in the present. So the motto of this story is, if you want to be a prostitute, do it out of love. Because the universe is going to look so much more favorably on that. And that's what you're going to get credit for. All right. Now, on a number of occasions, Edgar Cayce put himself to sleep on a couch. We still have the couch in our library if you ever get a chance to come to Virginia Beach. And he would close his eyes and he would see a flash of light. And on about a dozen experiences, this is what he actually became conscious of. This is the experience he became conscious of. I see myself as a tiny dot out of my physical body, which lies inert before me. I find myself oppressed by darkness, and there's a feeling of terrific loneliness. Suddenly I'm conscious of a white beam of light. As this tiny dot, I move upward, following the light, knowing that I must follow it or be lost. As I move along this path of light, I gradually become aware of various levels upon which there is movement. Upon the first levels, there are vague, horrible shapes, grotesque forms such as one sees in nightmares. Passing on, there begin to appear on either side misshapen forms of human beings with some part of the body magnified. He's moving through very dark, dense levels of consciousness to the higher realms. Again, there's a change, and I become conscious of gray-hooded forms moving downward. Gradually, these become lighter in color, then the direction changes, and these forms move upward, and the color of the robes grow rapidly lighter. Next, there begin to appear on either side vague outlines of houses, walls, trees, etc., but everything is motionless. As I pass on, there's more light and movement in what appear to be normal cities and towns. With the growth of movement, I become conscious of sounds, at first indistinct rumblings, then music, laughter, and the singing of birds. There is more and more light. The colors become very beautiful, and there's the sound of wonderful music. Excuse me. The houses are left behind. Ahead, there's only the blending of sound and color. Quite suddenly, I come upon a hall of records. It's a hall without walls, without ceiling, but I'm conscious of seeing an old man who hands me a large book, a record of the individual for whom I seek the information. Now, on another occasion, somebody asked Mr. Cayce, if I go to the Akashic Records, will I see this old man with the books? And the response was that whatever it took to bring to your conscious awareness the fact that information was coming from one level of consciousness to another, that's what you would see. If it took an old man with books, that's what you would see. If it took Elysian fields with flowers, that's the line he uses, that's what you would see. In other words, there's probably not some old librarian that's been up there since the dawn of time, that it is a symbolic representation of what transpires. And I want to go a step further and say that anyone who is doing anything psychic is actually accessing the Akashic Records because there is no other source of information, even if they don't know that that's what they're doing. And we pick up on the Akashic Records all the time, and we just don't know that's what's happening. And we meet someone for the very first time, and we don't like that person. Or we meet someone for the very first time, and we really have a connection to that person. And where does that come from? It comes from our memory of these records of the past, the memory that connects each and every one of us. Now, after Cayce tuned into the records, he would generally say, we have the body. And he would go on to say something like, the entities we find, we have the records here that are written upon time and space, as you would term same. So our records are written upon time and space. On a few occasions, he went into a little more detail. We have the records here of that entity now known or called Miss 1614. And give the interpretations of the records as we find them. Here, these are interpretations are chosen with the desire this may be a helpful experience for the entity, enabling it so analyze self as to fulfill in a greater sense those purposes for which it entered this experience. So even when Edgar Cayce gave a past life reading, he was always focusing on the present. What could that person do in the present to become a better person? And on one occasion, there was an individual who had a really challenging time for much of his life, had made some very bad decisions. And in the course of that reading, when Cayce's tuning into this person, Cayce talks about the strong propensity of free will. And I've broken this up into a couple of segments just to show you how this person's life has changed and altered, and certain things didn't happen because of their free will. The bold word is mine here. Yes, we have the body here and the record as has been made. So this is what actually occurred. And as may be made with the will as exercised. So there's still potentials and probabilities dependent upon choice. And the condition irrespective of the will's influence or effect as has been created. So there's karmic memory and destiny still at play that's going to happen regardless. We have conditions that might have been, things that could have occurred and are no longer probable. Things that are presently occurring and that may be potential realities. Do not get the three mixed up or cross purposes of either. Now, Gladys actually made a note in this record in saying that the issue here was that this man had had a lifelong problem with alcoholism for the first part of his life, and that had really been what had caused him so many problems. Now, even though there's only one Akashic record, I like to think of it really in three segments: the records of the past, the records of the present, and the records of the future. In terms of the past, Cayce would say, and this is different than many schools of thought, and I'm sure people here are going to disagree with that, Cayce would say, there is no such thing as karma between people. I do not have karma with any of you, and you do not have karma with me. Instead, what we have is we have memory, our own internal memory in relationship to someone. And the best analogy I can think of is sometimes when I'm talking to my wife about something we did 20 years ago, my memory of the experience is very different than her memory of that experience. Mine is more correct, but it is very different than her memory. And that's really how karmic memory works. Very often we have an experience with someone, and we take our own memory with us that's very different than that person's memory. They may not be carrying the same baggage that we're carrying because we have different memory of the experience. So in order to work with karmic healing, what we're really healing is our own memory in relationship to that person. In terms of the present, the universe is constantly pulling together those situations, those circumstances, those relationships, those people that will help us to become all we were meant to in the present. Free will does not mean that we get to choose the curriculum. It only means that we get to choose what we're willing to learn at a given time. And so the records of the present pull to us the same lessons over and over and over and over again until we learn them. And then the records of the future are an ever-changing array of probabilities. And believe it or not, we all dream about the future. We just don't know that that's what's happening. Mr. Cayce actually said that nothing of significance ever happens to us without it first being foreshadowed in a dream. And probably most everyone in this room has had experiences of tapping into the future. And it usually works like this. You're driving along and you think, wait a minute, I've already been driving to this place before. Or you're about having a conversation with someone, you think, wait a minute, I've already had this conversation. And we have an experience we call deja vu. Mr. Cayce would say that most experiences of deja vu are actually fragmentary dream recall. We dreamed it before it happened. We're not keeping track of our dreams, so we don't know that's what occurred. But the next morning, we're going through the experience, and that's when we have these experiences of deja vu. Now, the interesting thing about these Akashic records, especially in terms of the present, is after being involved with this work for 44 years, I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God has put in place a system in which everybody makes it. And I have to tell you, on a few occasions when I've said that, I've gotten hate mail because apparently the idea of an all-loving God making it possible for everyone to make it does not sit well with some people. I'm only imagining that they just don't want their ex-spouse to be there. That's all I can think of. And the way it works, this is what happens. If we do something really in accord with divine will, or our ultimate purpose, the next time around we get much wider parameters of will. We get more freedom of choice. And at this time around, if we really screw up and we do things not in accord with divine will, the next time around we're going to get much less parameters of freedom of choice. In other words, the universe is only going to let us get into so much trouble. One choice, one decision at a time. In terms of memory, we take patterns with us. Patterns, I've got 3 patterns here. One is like talents and abilities. You know, if you have a young child, a grandchild, 3 years old, sometimes little kids sit down at a piano and they just clump along. And sometimes kids sit down with music and they seem to have a real talent. We take our talents with us like luggage. And some of us are carrying around top-of-the-line Samsonite. We also take some of our frailties and our faults and our animosities and our anger and our biases and our hatreds and our prejudices. And we're carrying around these old paper sacks that we really need to turn loose of. And we carry around, to the second slide, our emotional responses to things. And then I've listed one of my favorite patterns there, martinis and chocolate. We take our addictions with us. And how does an addiction work? Well, you get up in the morning and you think, you know, I'm going to have a piece of chocolate today. And you think a little bit more about that, and a little while later you think, you know, I really need a piece of chocolate. And a little while passes and you think, I'm going to kill for a piece of chocolate. Because the more you think about something, whether it's chocolate or cigarettes or sex or love, the more it becomes a better part of your system, your makeup. Now, one of the other things about the Akashic Records is Cayce really outlines 4 different, at least 4, situations that tie into our relationships with one another and somehow connect with these Akashic Records. So, for example, Cayce would say that ultimately all of our relationships have the potential to be purposeful and helpful in terms of soul growth and personal transformation. And these are the relationships we bring with us over time. Now, sometimes we might think, I had a horrible upbringing. How can that have made me a better person? Well, sometimes we have experiences that in order to help other people with the very same experience, and we grow that way. Sometimes we have experiences that we really have to grow and beyond our comfort level to become a better person. They stretch us. Sometimes we have positive relationships where people really encourage us and help us to become a better person. So Cayce would say, ultimately, all of our relationships can be helpful and hopeful in terms of soul growth and personal transformation. Here's the scary one. Our relationships are repeated until they are healed. God loves each and every one of us the same. Maybe it's because God doesn't have to work with that person, but whatever the reason, God loves us all the same. And we're challenged, really, to learn how to love each and every one the same way. We learn most about ourselves through our interactions with others. In fact, Cayce says that whenever you have an emotional response to another human being, you are seeing a part of yourself. And I have to tell you, I had a real hard time with that for a while. That, somebody who was, I remember a place I used to work at, an accounting firm, and there was a woman in the office that drove me crazy. And when I read that line in the readings that, when we have an emotional response to someone, it's a part of ourselves, the best I could come up with was, well, I hope whatever it is not as obvious in me as it is in her. Because it just drove me crazy. But in thinking about it, I noticed that very often she would say something in that office, and I would have a response to it. And not everyone was having the same level of response as I was, which led me to the idea that even my own worst enemy has a best friend. And even my best friend has people who don't like them. Why? Because we are conditioned to see something particular in other people, and that is in terms of our own soul growth and development, what we need to work on. And finally, our souls seeking personal wholeness, our goal is to eventually learn how to love everyone with whom we come in contact. Everyone. So I've pulled out just a few case histories to go through this to show you how it works. So the first one, ultimately, all relationships have the potential to be purposeful and helpful. This is a story of a couple named Michael and Anna, who both knew Edgar Cayce. Michael was a very devout Catholic. No, I got that backwards. Michael was not a very devout Catholic. He was Catholic, but his wife, Anna, was very devout. She wanted to go to church every day. He thought Christmas and Easter was probably good enough. They dated for 6 years before they got married. Back in the 30s, it was not so common to move in together ahead of time. In fact, it probably rarely happened. And so when you actually got married and moved in with someone, sometimes it was a real surprise what it was like to live with this person. So before they got married, they got a reading from Mr. Cayce. And he said he would give them 3 things that would really help them in their marriage. 1, as a couple, he actually said in any working relationship, any family relationship, it would be good to come up with a unity of purpose. In other words, no matter what else is happening, what can we agree on? What is our ultimate unity of purpose? What is it we can always agree on? The second thing he told them was to become cognizant of the fact that any kind of partnership, marital relationship, was really a 50-50 proposition, which to Mr. Cayce meant that you have to be willing to give in at least 50% of the time and let the other person be right. 50% of the time at least. And the third, he told them they had to beware of selfishness because they each had a strong bout of selfishness. So as soon as they said, I do, they started fighting. And they fought about politics. They fought about religion. They fought about money. They fought about sex. They fought about everything. They fought about politics because he was very strong-willed, and he believed when it came to politics, he should be able to tell his wife who to vote for, and she should do it. She had ideas of her own. They fought about sex. She believed that sex was only for having children, and since they weren't ready to have children, there was really no reason to have sex. He thought it was a little more recreational than that. They fought about religion. Remember, I told you that she was really into it, and he wasn't so much so. They fought so often, they had another reading. And Edgar Cayce told them he would give them a past life, several past lives that would let them know what was happening in terms of their karmic memory with one another. According to Mr. Cayce, in their most recent past life in England, before Henry VIII had broken with the church, it was a Catholic country, She had been a nun, and he had been a priest. They had been in the same convent, and he had talked her into breaking her vow of celibacy, and she had never forgiven him. Apparently, she's trying to re-fulfill that vow in the present. But that was part of the issue. Prior to that, in ancient Egypt, she had been assigned to him. Apparently, there had been a time when the state would decide who you would marry. She had been assigned to him, and he rejected her. And so there was a sense of rejection deep within her. So Mr. Cayce encouraged them to continue. In fact, he told them, for they are necessary one to the other in fulfilling those purposes for which their activities are in this present experience. As to the application, this should be according to the choice of each. They should be cooperative one with another, the way you know the application you must make. Well, he was a writer, and she noticed that when he was away on writing assignments, they fought less. So she encouraged him to do even more writing assignments. He actually went to Europe and did some writing. He went all over the country and did writing, because when they're away, they don't fight. They still never really learned their lesson together. Eventually, he was stricken with an illness that doctors said resembled a combination of rheumatoid arthritis, meningitis, and infantile paralysis. And he was confined to a wheelchair and could only move his hands. And guess who had to take care of him? The universe came up with a way to keep them together. And interestingly enough, some of these people who had readings would probably be embarrassed to learn that anytime they contacted Mr. Cayce's office or wrote a note, it would be put in a file where years later we could all read it for our own enjoyment. And he wrote, Hewlin Cayce, saying how miserable he was with his wife. So miserable, in fact, and this is an exact quote, that if his wife ever died and another woman asked him to get married, quote, probably I would have to kill her. I feel wonderfully convinced that monasticism is the only approach to happiness. So within a few years, he passed away from his illnesses. They never really learned the lesson. They're going to come back again. Our relationships are repeated until they're healed. I'm not sure how many of you have ever read Gina Sermonara's book, Many Mansions, but one of the case histories in there were about a pair of sisters who hated one another. One, I believe, was about 4 years older than the other. They hated each other so much that they lived on a farm. They went down to their father's barn. They shared a room together. Went down to the barn, got some white paint, and they drew a white line in the bedroom, and you were not allowed to cross over to the other side of the room because that was your sister's side. So anyway, this is how the woman, who I knew was a wonderful aide, told Gina about their experiences together. The disharmony between my sister and me started at a very early age. The first incident I remember took place when I was about 8 and she 14, okay, 6 years between them. Two cousins, girls about the same age as ours, visited us for a few days. Any attention I got annoyed my sister to the point that she would whip up all kinds of imaginary things, such as pretending she was going somewhere, or that she had toys to play with, and if they wanted to share these things with her, they would have to leave me out of it. She always felt quite free to take anything that was mine, first without my knowing it, and eventually it didn't even matter whether I knew it or not. I was doing waitress work and would bring home my tips and keep them in a box. In checking just to see how I was doing, I discovered that either I couldn't count or someone was taking my money. I found out what was going on. My sister was helping herself. So they had a rotten relationship all their lives. Mr. Cayce gave them a reading, and even after the reading, it didn't help. According to Mr. Cayce, they had been neighbors in Williamsburg, Virginia during the 1800s. And the older sister who had had a husband who she did not like. And the husband got basically what would be called tuberculosis, I guess. And he was on the verge of dying. And the woman really didn't care. But the neighbor was alarmed. And so the neighbor lady came over and started nursing him back to health, bringing him soup, poultices, kind of helped him. And he lived and survived. And he decided to go home with the neighbor lady. Now, the woman who didn't like him, but she sure didn't want anyone to like him either. So she became bitter and angry that her husband had left her. And sure enough, these two sisters come back, the older sister being the one who had let her husband go, and the younger sister being the one who had taken him. And according to the younger sister, who I knew all their life, they didn't really like each other. And they avoided each other as best they could, even after readings from Mr. Cayce encouraging them to fix it. And time passed. And as often does, members of their family started passing away. First their parents, their spouses, brothers, sisters. And eventually, when the older sister was in her 80s and the younger sister was in her 70s, they had nowhere else to go but to live with each other. So they moved in together. And for 3 years, they talked. They talked about each of their perception of things in the past. They talked about how much time they wasted. They talked about the relationship they could have had and never did. And according to the younger sister, on her deathbed, her older sister said, and I quote, "I hope we can be sisters again." And she passed away. So, I think the two of them, they actually got it. They actually got it. Now, any of us who are involved in a long-term relationship, a partnership, know that it's work. It's sometimes work. So this is one of my favorite stories about how we may underestimate that work. David Kahn was a young man, about 20, who had fallen in love with a off-Broadway actress and wanted to marry her. Her name was Lucille. And he never did anything without getting a reading from Mr. Cayce. In fact, throughout his life, he had more than 250 readings. He went to Virginia Beach, Virginia. He's sitting in Mr. Cayce's office. And he asked Mr. Cayce, sitting there asleep on the couch, laying there asleep on the couch, he wants to know from Mr. Cayce, he asked the question, "What will be the result of a marriage between myself and Lucille?" And Cayce replies, "What you make of it." Well, David was not quite happy with the specificity of that response. And so he got a little more, he's sitting in the room, so he got a little more particular. This is what David asks. "Is this girl the type and quality of womanhood best suited to this man for a successful life?" So asleep on the couch, Mr. Cayce responds, "May be made so in each." Still not quite happy with how this is going, David gets very, very particular. And this very naive young 20-year-old man asks a question, and I quote, this is an exact quote, "Will we be perfectly happy always?" Cayce's response is, "No." He goes on to say, "They will not always be happy, but they may be always made content. Conditions exist between each that they may be made compatible and brought in a position where each may be made content." Well, apparently that was close enough for David. He and Lucille married. They had 2 children, and they made a successful marriage together. Yay. One more. This one was a woman who actually had a lot of health problems. Many more health problems than someone her age should have had. She was only in her 30s. Actually, let me tell you the story. Is that what I wanted to? No, here, I forgot I included this slide. Someone asked Edgar Cayce how they could keep their love alive. And I think the answer applies to any of our relationships. So the question was, how can we keep our love alive? Remember each, love is giving. It is growth. It may be cultivated or it may be seared. That of selflessness on the part of each is necessary. Love grows. Love endures. Love forgives. Love understands. Love keeps those things rather as opportunities that to others would become hardships. They do not sit still and expect the other to do all the giving or all the forgiving, but rather make it a unison and purpose of each to be a complement one to the other ever. And the final case history is, there was a woman who sought help from Mr. Cayce. She was only in her 30s. She had problems. Let me list them here. She had problems with her spine. She had neurosis. She had poor eliminations. She had the beginnings of arthritis. She had poor circulation. She had problems with depression. She got a health reading. And Mr. Cayce outlined what she could do for her health and gave her some health remedies. But towards the end of the reading, he suggested that the reason she was sick was because she hated her mother. And that until she got over the hate of her mother, she would never fully be well. This is what he told her. All animosity, all hate, all jealousy must be eliminated from the mental self, and the hopes and the desires to be able to contribute to the welfare of those less fortunate than self. For remember, unless we learn to love something, even those who have been and are our enemies, we have not begun to think straight. So, now I've talked to you about how karma is really nothing more than memory, and the Akashic Records of the past deal with memory. Let me tell you one of the most interesting stories that's in the Cayce database. So I have to give you some background information. John Jay was one of the founding fathers of this country. He lived between 1745 and 1829. He was part of the American Revolution. He authorized some of the Federalist Papers, which talked about the kind of government we should have. He was the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, appointed by George Washington, had a legal background. He was governor of New York. And in the biography of John Jay, this is a real story. This is the book right here. This is the story they tell. They tell the story of the conch shell beauty. This is the story the way it's written. Jay and Colonel Morris had walked to Gray's Ferry and ordered dinner at the inn. They sat in the common room thronged with travelers and country people returning from market. With women they conversed about with Whigs and Tories and beef and butter and Congress. While thus engaged, they observed a most beautiful country girl about 17 enter the inn and approach the fire. She was, Jay said, exquisitely beautiful. An object so charming immediately diverted our attention from the herd around us. Jay sat entranced by her extraordinary complexion, her eyes and teeth and lips. Morris suggested she would make his son an excellent wife. She objected that no gentleman's son would marry a poor country girl. The two men invited her to dinner, but she declined. Jay compared the damsel's complexion with the flesh color of the inside of a conch shell. During the afternoon, Jay and Morris talked of nothing but the conch shell beauty. They agreed to tell their friends of her, but to conceal her name and dwelling. The story became an oft-repeated interlude during the Continental Congress. It was repeated over and over and over again. We know this conch shell beauty. We're not going to tell you where she is, but she's the most beautiful girl in the world. So that's the background. Now let's move forward. And on one occasion, Edgar Cayce was giving a reading to a 6-year-old boy. And he says, yes, we have the records here of that entity now called 1188. This person is going to be inclined with law, especially trained in the phase of same where activities would deal with machinery or corporations that deal with same, or railroads or airways of machinery. He would go on to become one of the executives of Boeing Aircraft in Washington State. As to the appearance of the entity in the earth and those we find that make for influences in the present, before this, the entity was in that land of the present nativity during those periods when there were the early establishings of the various associations and activities with other countries, the recognition of other countries as this being an organized government. The entity then in the name of John Jay. Now, interestingly enough, in the background information from this person, years later, this person wrote a note to Gladys Davis and told this story from 1951. When I was 4 years old or thereabouts, I was walking along the shore with my nurse and came to some conch shells which had unusual pink color to them. I picked one up and admiringly asked the nurse what it was called. When she said conch shell, something seemed to happen to me which gave me the feeling of being in a vacuum. I connected that conch shell with something so foreign to my present life that I momentarily forgot who I was or where I was. This annoyed the nurse, and it was she who brought me out of my vagary. It took me a moment to adjust myself, but when I did, I was startled at the speed with which I forgot the details of my recent contemplation. I do remember that I turned to the nurse and I asked her if people's faces are ever the color of conch shells. I remember Edgar Cayce had said this person had been John Jay. So that's how memory works. That's how memory works. Now let me tell you a memory story that I witnessed when my son was 1 year old. He had a crib that looked very much like this on the second floor, had very high bars. And about 12 times, my wife and I would be down on the first floor in the kitchen, and we would hear this tremendous bang. And he would jump out of the crib onto the floor, and he'd start screaming Bloody Mary because he hurt himself. And I'd run upstairs and put him back in the crib, and it happened about 12 times. And one day I told Mary, he is going to break something. That is too high. He's going to break something. And my wife was pretty psychic, and she said, well, let me figure out what he's doing. So she sat down, and she kind of tuned into the room. And after about 15 minutes, she told me, this is what I got. She said, I got that during medieval France, he was out in the fields, and the sheriff came by in one of those wooden carts with the bars and arrested him for something he did not do and took him into court. And when he's waking up, he's seeing those bars and thinking, I've got to get out of here, I've got to get out of there, and he jumps over the edge. This is what those old carts look like. And after I heard that, I thought to myself, well, I'll make it into a daybed. And I took all the bars off around the bed, so there wasn't any bars, and he never jumped out of the crib again. Now, even if that story was just part of our imagination, I can tell you as soon as he got to kindergarten, there were many days he was terrified that he would get in trouble for something that somebody else did. It was a memory pattern, somehow being terrified for what somebody else did. One more having to do with the past. This was a reading given to a marble cutter in 1925. Cayce talked about the various past lives that were influencing this person. He had been a guard during Nero's time, which made him insecure because Nero was prone to extremes and he never knew what was going to happen next. He'd been a Persian salesman in precious stones at an Earthkeepers conference. He had been a stone cutter in Egypt. We had been very upset. He had loved the religious rituals in the temple, but he was upset about the intrigue. And at Atlantis, he had been drawn to granite. During his reading, Cayce told him, "The entity has those special qualifications in workers of stone and in salesmanship of precious stones. The entity would have made a wonderful jeweler. We find the entity would have made a preacher." He told him, "Live in that eastern portion of country better than western." He was from Ohio. "Then in salesmanship, or in the application of those arts as applied to stone in any form, keep first and foremost these principles." Just as a follow-up, a year and a half later, he moved to Georgia. "I'm at a present shop acting as superintendent of the plant. I shall be here until the later part of March or April." And at that point, he's going to become sales manager of the Georgia Marble Company. So again, Cayce pinpointed it. In terms of the Akashic Records of the present, we draw to ourselves the same lesson over and over and over again until we learn that. And this dynamic is perfectly portrayed in a movie that most of us probably know about. No, that's not the... Let me come back to that. I got that slide in the wrong place. There, Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day. Most of us I know have seen Groundhog Day, where the same thing happens over and over and over again until he starts making it right, starts doing the right thing, and then he grows. He decides, after being selfish and obstinate and thinking he's God's gift to women, he decides to work on self-improvement. And that's what really happens to each and every one of us, that we have the same lesson over and over and over again until we actually change. Now, to go back to the other slide, basically, in terms of the present, our life is not created by the things that happen to us. It's how we respond to the things that happen to us. So this guy just got fired. And he's joyful because he never really liked the job anyway. And he sees it as a way to do whatever he wanted instead. Somebody else at the same company becomes upset, frustrated, decides, you know what, I'm going to be on welfare for as long as I can. Those horrible guys at the company should have never done this to me. They both had the same experience, but the way they respond to that experience is what changes their life. So our life is created by one choice, one decision at a time. That's what we create our life. So in terms of, we have time for me to tell this story. I'll tell the short version of it. About an experience I had that I finally learned a lesson. And as background information, when I was 8 years old, my mother got me a little cat, a little kitten. And you know how little kittens have little tiny paws and really sharp claws. Even now I can close my eyes and I can imagine what those little claws felt like in my hand. And I adored that kitten. And it followed me everywhere. And my parents used to let it go out front because it would just stay in the yard, not a problem. But one day they let it out front when they had friends visiting. And unbeknownst to us, the cat got on top of the tire. And when the people drove away, the cat was gone. And I remember my mom came to me and she said, "We need to go bury Smokey." And I said, "I will never love another cat again." And I meant it. And my parents had other pets, and I refused to bond with them. And time passed. And the universe in its wisdom eventually brought me a first wife who had 5 cats. And we had 1 cat box and 5 cats. And when I got home from work, somehow the scent of that cat box bothered me more than my wife. And so my job every day was to clean that cat box. And I used to say little irritating things to her. I know now they were irritating. Don't worry, it's all going to turn out well. So this sounds like a bad story. It'll all turn out well. But I used to tell her that cats were little excrement machines and the only good cat was a dead cat. I mean, all these horrible things. And for whatever reason, eventually we divorced. I don't think it was necessarily about the cats. But time passed. And my current wife, Mary, we've been together 25 years. When we first got together, she used to talk about getting this dog. And I'd always say, no, a dog is too much work. We're not getting a dog. And then we'd have a big fight. So after about 6 months, I became really wise, and I said, okay, yeah, let's get a dog someday, with absolutely no intention of ever getting one. But that ended, we didn't have a fight. But she kept talking about this dog. I mean, it was like a weekly conversation. Well, what kind of dog should we get? Oh, my God. So finally, one day we were at a friend of hers, and the daughter was an older woman. Her daughter was 20 years old, and she rescued feral kittens. You know what that is? They go into like a town where there's wild cats that you can't help, but you can save the babies, and the babies can be adopted and farmed out and everything. So this woman, I'm not making up, she had 17 little kittens, 5 weeks and under. And Mary picked up this little kitten, and she said, oh, please, can we take him home? Please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please. And in the blink of an eye, I thought to myself, that cat is going to be a lot easier to take care of than a dog. And if I go with that cat, I won't have to worry about a dog. So I said, sure. So the cat came home with me, and that cat followed me around constantly. It would climb up to where I was doing writing at my desk. It would climb up on my desk. It would put its legs over my keyboard, so I had to do a kitty massage for a minute, you know. And eventually my heart started opening like this. And about a year later, I noticed this cat who we named Isis. Before Isis, this was an Egyptian goddess, Isis. She would stare at the wall constantly, and I'd say, Mary, why is she staring at the wall? And Mary said, well, she's lonely. She wants a friend. So eventually, we got this cat named Cleo and I'm not making this up, I had Cleo for 19 years. For whatever reason, Cleo adored me. And I would hold Cleo up in my face and talk to her, and Cleo would put a paw on either side of my face and stare at me like in adoration. And Mary, my wife had sometimes a gutter mouth. Mary would say she would put words in the cat's mouth and say the cat was saying, and I quote, get rid of the bitch, Daddy. It'll just be me and you. Just me and you. So we had Cleo, and after a year, one day, I go to bed before my wife. She stays up really late. And one day in the middle of the night, she turned on the bedroom light. She said, we have an emergency. We are out in the country, in the middle of nowhere. It's called Pongo country. We have acreage around us. And she flips on the right, and she says, this little kitten was outside and wants in. And she had gotten a kitten out on the front porch and brought it in the house. And being a quick thinker, I said, a line from the Bible, we are full up at the inn. Put the cat out. And unbeknownst to me, she did put it out, but she started feeding him every day. And so the cat never really left. Now, this is going to sound really bad, but don't worry, it turns out okay. So one day I drive home. I have a 175-foot driveway to the street. I drive home and get out of the car, and this cat starts walking up the driveway, dragging her hind leg. She's been hit by a car. So Mary and I take her to the vet, and as soon as the vet spoke the word $1,400, Mary whipped out a card, and we fixed that cat. And we actually had a friend who took it home. And about 3 weeks later, I drive up, and I look out the driveway, and there's another cat walking down the driveway, shaved down by a farmer's combine, all the way to its spine. We took it to that. That one was only $600 to fix. And then one day, Mary was taken, I'm telling you, all this is true. Mary was taking our son's babysitter home, and they saw a kitten run out in front of the car and got hit. That cat was $1,700 to fix. So when Mary came home after that, I was really frustrated. And this is almost exactly what I said. I said, Mary, we are in the middle of nowhere. Is there a cat vortex in this yard somehow? We are in the middle of nowhere. How is this happening? And this is what my wife said, and I swear this is true. She said, every day when I feed the birds, I pray to St. Francis that if there's an animal who needs our help, he can send it here. And I felt like this big. So I said, where do you pray? I mean, yeah, where do you say your prayer? And she showed me, and I swear to God, I went out there and I said, okay, universe, I have learned this lesson. If you want to send me a cat a day, I will take it. I'm not going to fight anymore. Bring it on. And we have never had another cat to that house since then. Never. Never. So to just finish that story, when my son got to be about 6, he kept saying, Dad, can we have a dog? And I'd say, yes, as soon as you can pick up dog poop. And he'd stop talking about it for a while. And then when he got to be 10, he asked again, and I said, yes, as soon as you can pick up dog poop. And he says, okay, Dad, I'll pick up dog poop if you get me 2 sacks. I said, what do you need 2 sacks for? He said, Dad, that's what he says when you're so stupid. Dad, I need 2 sacks because one's for the dog poop and one's for my vomit because it's going to make me sick. So, the point of all this is, the universe is going to draw you the same story, the same lesson over and over and over again until you've learned it. In terms of the Akashic Records of the future, it's constantly calculating the future, constantly pulling together what we need. But my first experience with somehow glimpsing the future occurred in 1975 in a physics class. And I was sitting in the front of the class, and this classroom was shared by the astronomy department. And as I'm sitting in the front row waiting for class to start, I looked over at the blackboard, corkboard, and there was a big article about the Jupiter effect. I don't know if anyone remembers this. But in 1982, there was going to be a planetary alignment where every planet in the solar system lined up with the sun, and astronomers were wondering if it would have some kind of really strong magnetic pull upon the Earth. And as I'm reading that, this is 1975, 11th grade, as I'm reading that article, somehow a slide kind of dropped in front of my eyes. And I knew that I was living and working in Virginia Beach, Virginia, no later than December 31st, 1982. It was like, just knowing it like that. Well, time passed, and I finished high school, and I went to college, University of Colorado for a couple of years, dropped out for a couple of years, got a job at a bank, went back to school, started going to Virginia Beach. Eventually, I got a call because I had met some people there from the accounting office. All my background was finance, offering me a job. I said, I'm going to graduate in December. Can we wait 3 weeks until I graduate? Yes. I stayed for Christmas. I flew out to Virginia Beach on December 26th, and I started working at ARE on December 27th, 1982, 4 days to what I had seen 7 years earlier. That's somehow glimpsing the future. When I had my first date with my wife, Mary, I honestly didn't think anything about it. I had a nice time. We went out to see a movie, and I dropped her off at the hotel she was staying at. She was one of our speakers at a conference, and I was conference manager, and I'd gone out with her to a movie. And I was living with some friends of mine, and I'm standing in the mirror, and I'm shaving, and as soon as I'm shaving, I look in the mirror, and I see myself holding a baby in a blue blanket. And my friend Roy walks in. He says, how was the date? And I said, I think I just met my wife, and I think we're going to have a son. And that's exactly what happened. And then the last story I've seen about the future I want to tell you is when my son was 1, he started having tremendous earaches. He cried out every night. We were on the verge of getting him ear tubes. And my wife started having horrible problems with asthma. And I started having migraines every night. We didn't know why at the time. But when we had added an addition to the house when the son was born, the contractor had not sealed the roof, and we had black mold through the whole downstairs. So we had to gut the whole house. That's a long story. You don't want to go into that. But one night, Mary was gone, and Tyler was crying, 1 year old, and I had him in the master bed. I'm patting him on the back, and I'm thinking to myself, I guess like some fathers would, I wonder if he'll ever remember this when he grows up. You know, like when he thinks his father's an idiot, will he ever remember I tried to help him stop crying? And as soon as I had that thought, I felt my brain kind of slide on ice. That's the best way to describe it. And I saw myself laying in a hospital bed with very thin arms on top of the blankets, age spots all over my body. My eyes were closed. My son was a middle-aged man, about 50, holding my hand. And I knew I was on the verge of dying. And I remembered holding him when he was 1 year old. And I think that was the link in the bed. And I was conscious, but he didn't know I was conscious. And as soon as I had that last thought, I kind of saw a light, and that was the end of it. Well, I was so impressed with that. I thought, oh my God, I had a breakthrough time. That was out of time. I'm sure I saw my death scene. So when Mary came home, I was so impressed. I told her the story. And as soon as I finished, she said, and I quote, well, where the hell was I? And I said, you were long dead. And my third wife was down in the cafeteria getting Tyler something to eat. So, the Akashic Records of the future. Now, on one occasion, Tom Segru asked about his future writing career, and his lineup of questions makes a great overview of how the future is changeable. So Tom Segru is sitting there asking about questions about writing. So Tom asked Mr. Cayce, could the Reader's Digest be interested at this time in an article? And Mr. Cayce says, if there was a demand from 100 people, they'd do it. They'll pay $3,000 for it. That would have been quite a bit of money back then. So Tom gets, excited. How can this be set up at once? Cayce replies, have 100 people write in them asking them to do it. Well, perhaps he thought that might be a lot of work, so he changed his magazines and asked about a different one. In what department of the Saturday Review of Literature could I aim plans for the success of his paper? He's writing papers on things. Cayce says, in writing articles for the same. So another probable future is he could write articles for the Saturday Review of Literature. That excites Tom. In what directions or what special lines? The answer is, these will show the abilities. He could do just about anything in most any phase. For this publication, too, is expanding. They're expanding the number of articles they do. He asks, into what permanent job could I fit? Cayce says, reviewing articles for the magazine as well as contributing to same. When can I take over this position? Cayce says, when is tomorrow? This depends upon too many things. We can't tell you that it'll be Thursday the 12th of August or Friday the 14th of February. It depends on how many friends are to be contributory to this. Will people help? Will they do it or not? Will Tom Segru respond or no? Will there be a hurricane to blow him away or no? Will there be a train wreck that will injure someone associated with same? Who can tell? We are through. The point is, Cayce said that enough things had occurred, enough choices, enough decisions that had been set in motion, that he could see glimpses of the person's next life, what they would be involved in. I've just picked out 3 for you. So this was a retired farmer. As to the appearances of this entity, we find that before this, the entity was in the court of England, and that of Alfred called the Great. And those influences as exercised in the present sphere are seen in the understanding of the law as written in any given state, and in the next reincarnation, we find this entity a lawyer. Another one. This was a teacher and inventor, and had been working on the same design for a long, long time. Cayce told him he'd actually been working on the same design of a machine to help move water in a previous life. So Cayce says, in the present urge from sane is seen the desire to complete the machine. Much of that attempted to be accomplished at that time. This may not in the present experience be completed. It will be in the next. The person asks, can the machine be made to operate successfully? The one which I've worked on at times since boyhood. It's this memory he had had since he was a little boy. Cayce says it will be done in the next incarnation. So sometimes we have projects, things that we do that go from one incarnation to the next. And the last one, this was a woman born in Bloomington, Nebraska. You will give the relationship of this entity, this is Gertrude, and the universe and the universal forces, giving the conditions which are as personalities latent and exhibited in the present life. You will answer the questions as I ask them. Cayce says, yes, Bloomington, Nebraska isn't very far from where this body will be born the next time at Channing, Texas. They're about 435 miles away. So again, you can see glimpses of the future, even to the point of something unfolding for the next life. Now we have time for us to do a little experience. We're not going to share it with anyone. We're just going to stay in our chairs. But Cayce said the imaginative forces were a great way to open ourselves up to intuition. So I'm going to have us imagine one of our own past lives and see how that life is impinging or helping or working with the present. So if you could just close your eyes for just a moment, get comfortable in your chair, and we're going to see if we can't glimpse the Akashic records of the past for us. So I want you to breathe in relaxation and breathe it all the way down to your tippy toes. And breathe out any tension. And as you breathe in, notice how the air feels cool as you breathe in and warm as you breathe out. Breathe in relaxation to your legs and knees and tummy and back, shoulders, forehead and head. And just breathe and relax and listen to the sound of my voice. Even the light feeling of relaxation will give you an experience. This is an experience you'd like to feel. You're eager, relaxed, eager to learn. You won't have to make any special effort. Just listen. And I'm going to count from 1 to 7. And with every count, I want you just to take another deep breath and enter your own state of relaxation. 1, take a breath and relax. Breathe in and then breathe out slowly. And 2, take a breath. 3, and relax. 4, breathe and relax. 5, 6, 7, and breathe and relax. And I want you to be in a state of relaxation where you're aware of your surroundings, you're aware of the activities of your mind, and you're aware of my voice. And in your imagination, I want you to let your mind wander back in time to a safe place long before the present. In your imagination, I want you to see totally detached and totally relaxed one of your best experiences from long ago. You'll be able to see it clearly in your imagination. You won't have to make any effort. So just relax and breathe. And in your imagination, I want you to imagine yourself sitting beside a large body of water. A lake, a pond, some body of water with a sparkling, smooth surface. Just relax into the scene next to this large body of water. Slowly, ever so slowly, the surroundings come into focus. You can see the scenery around you. With greater clarity, you can see the surroundings, the sky, the ground, the body of water, all as it appeared long ago. Now, in your imagination, I want you to look into the water and see what you look like. How does your face appear? Are you male or are you female? Are you young or are you old? Can you tell what you're wearing? What does it feel like to be who you are here in this long ago past? Make a mental note of who you are and what you seem to be doing. Look around at the scenery. What does it look like? Can you see grass or soil or trees or mountains or stretches of desert sand? Can you feel the warmth of the sun upon your face? Or are there clouds and wind? Can you feel the mood of this place? Make a mental note of what you see and feel. Do you see other buildings or structures? Are there animals or people? If you have difficulty seeing, simply try to hear or feel this place. This is your opportunity to experience a personal past. It's a time to think of things once thought, things once felt, and things once heard. So for a moment, listen to the sounds of this place. Next in your imagination, I want you to look for a time when you're with other people. Perhaps someone special, someone with whom you have a close bond, perhaps a child or an adult. But there's someone very special to you, someone who has great meaning. Who is this person? And how do you feel about them? Next, in your imagination, I want you to see a scene from your childhood in that lifetime from long ago. See yourself, a positive experience from that childhood. Are you playing, getting into mischief, laying upon the ground, sitting in the lap of someone who loves you? Look around at where you are and what's going on. Next, in your imagination, I want you to go to an important event, a positive important event when you were older. Perhaps a major event, an event that had great meaning up to you. But in your imagination, see yourself in this important event when you were older. Where are you and what are you doing? If people are talking, what are they saying? Listen to the sounds of this place, take it all in. Now, if you can, in your imagination, I want you to imagine, what was your purpose in that lifetime of long ago? Was anything left uncompleted? See if you can imagine that lifetime all at once so that you can see all the life events tied together as a whole. And see if you can imagine all the life events tied together as a whole for your life in the 21st century. So you can see these two lifetimes standing side by side. The one from the long ago past and the one from the present. Can you see any similarities? Do you see any patterns that have repeated? Do you see any people that you know now that you knew then? Look at all the similarities and patterns and people that connect these two lifetimes together. And in your imagination, I want you to imagine yourself back to the present. Back to this conference center for Earth Keepers in the year 2018. And I'm going to count to 1 to 5, and with every breath, you're going to be more grounded in the present time, present place, right here. So 1, take a breath, and feel yourself reorienting to the present. 2, breathe and feel refreshed. 3, breathe and feel revitalized. 4, fully reoriented in the present. And 5, you can open your eyes, firmly grounded in present place, present time, right now. And to close, I just want to tell you all that I consider it an honor, a privilege, a sacred duty to be a part of the Edgar Cayce organizations. It remains the strongest motivating influence in my life. And I would encourage you all to come to Virginia Beach if you get a chance, or to check us out online. In addition to ARE, Edgar Cayce's ARE, we have the Casey Riley School of Massage, where you can get a 700-hour curriculum in massage therapy. In fact, if you're on staff, I will pay you once a week to get a massage. Atlantic University has 2 accredited master's programs, one in leadership, one in transpersonal psychology. You can do them all online. In addition to all that, we have study groups around the country, around the world, online. It's getting together like this with people of like mind that I think really charges us. And the study group program that does that all over the country. You can go to our website and find out a group near you. In addition to that, we do conferences not only in Virginia Beach, but throughout the country, throughout the world. I'm doing a conference in a month in Sweden. We also have tours around the world. In addition to that, we have a great spa. If you ever come to Virginia Beach and get a massage, in fact, if I'm there in town and you let me know ahead of time, I will get you a colonic on the house. So we do about 300 therapies a week. 300 therapies a week. We also have a number of service programs. Our largest program is a prison program, where we send out between 12 and 16,000 books free to prisoners, spread entirely by word of mouth. If you ever go to prison, we have a really good program for you. Just keep that in mind. I'd like to close with one of my favorite readings from the Cayce material. Make the world a better place because you have lived in it. You can only do that by the hour, by the moment, by the day you live. For you're not promised more than one day in physical consciousness at a time. Use it. Don't abuse it. God bless you all, and thank you for being here this weekend.
Töne. Sondern lasst uns angenehmere anstimmen und freudenvollere. Freude, schöner Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betreten feuertrunken, himmlische dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode strenge tut. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel war. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode strenge tut. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel war. Tochter aus Elysium.